Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because it is certainly good to be here. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Mud City. Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to jump right in. We're back with the arches, and when last we left off, we had Mary Young Pickersgill here. Right, and the Capitol Dome, all right, the flag, and there was a lot to this one. I only covered a small portion. I only did like the Washington War of 1812 part because there's so much information just in this one seal here. All right, and so when they move on from that, right after the War of 1812 and all of that, we have our prosperity and control, as I call it, with the double-axed fasces in the wheat or corn, to another period of the happy worker bee. All right, this is just twice because I turned around because now we're starting to head back down. Like the bee and the fasces are the top of the arch, and so going down, we have like the reverse pattern at the top, right? It goes fasces, right? Is that right? Fasces, beehive, fasces, right? Fasces, beehive. Then we get to this guy, and now go away. And so I'm gonna blow up a little bit on this guy. And so this, when I did my walking delusional, it was suggested in the comments there that this was Vulcan and the printing press, and that makes sense on a lot of different levels, as we're about to find out. And just to quickly reiterate what's happening here on the arches front. The makers of the Baltimore Trust building were gracious enough to place their version of the history of Baltimore in this archway, in both archways. They use the same seals on both sides, right? And I haven't determined if they're in the same order yet or not, but so here we have. We have this Vulcan character here, right, with the ears, and this, which is, I didn't bring it up, but when I was first sort of looking into this, there are printing presses that look like this, so I'm going to put that away for a little bit, and I'm gonna, just to, kind of demonstrate how the process works for me, the first thing I want to do is, okay, let's look at Vulcan. What could that mean, because I knew there's more to Vulcan than just Star Trek. I knew there was mythology behind it. All right. And so my first demonstration here is just going to show you the different ways that just these two different search engines, bring up Vulcan, right? So DuckDuckGo here, the first thing they bring up is the mythology, right? That's not even Vulcan, so I don't know why that's even there at the number 2 slot, right? And they come in with this Vulcan Earth Ranger software. And I think it's becoming less and less coincidental, right? That almost everything I'm doing comes to some form of software, right? And this says real-time visualized operational platform. It all usually has something to do with the visual aspect and the animation and with the F# and the churches and that F# programming, then we go to materials, all right, and just on the other side of it, and I'm going to have to dig a lot deeper. I dig a lot deeper through Google here, right? At least Google brings up local stuff first, right? We got Vulcan Materials Company, which is going to make sense why there's material companies named Vulcan, and food, right? There's the story of Vulcan is, he covers a lot of ground. All right, here we go. Homepage for Vulcan.com, right? Areas of practice, arts and entertainment, investments. And I'm going to look at this, but I'm going to start with the mythology first. So again, almost everything that I end up looking at comes back to and just, going through Georgetown and accidentally, happening to look right and finding that hidden software company that, represents major corporations, so this is definitely, non-coincidental, right? Okay, so let's start with the mythology a little bit, right? And I'm going to try to be as brief as I can, but because it's so extensive, right? He's the god of fire, volcanoes, deserts, metalworking, and the forge in ancient Roman religion and myth, right? He's often depicted with a blacksmith's hammer. Ooh, does he have the hammer here? Where did he go? Sorry, guys. There he is. See, I have yet to readapt this new laptop to it, so I don't quite see the hammer. Right, in Greek, and the Greek counterpart for him is Hephaestus, right? And he's got one in the Etruscan as well, right? But he comes in right away, and the earliest founders of Rome, and there's one legend that has him as father of Romulus, which is interesting, right? That he could be the founder, the founding father's father. So they talk about, there's so much history with it, and it goes so deep, but there's only a few connections I really want to make, because there's going to be room for me to grow with Vulcan here, and most of these Roman gods, because, like I said, it's been coming ever since I found these two buildings, the B&O building and the Baltimore Trust building, and there's other buildings downtown as well, which I've yet to get to. But they all have these Roman and Greek gods about them, and the imagery and the mythology is all over the city of Baltimore. It started with, right from episode 1 of Mud City, with Orpheus and King Gambrinus in the test episode, for crying out loud, right? So there's definitely a hidden story here. There's a reason they put all this stuff up there, but then don't tell us really why, So one of the things I want to talk about quickly, and again, I think it's in the, because there's a couple of different origin myths for him, right? And let's see. Hopefully I can find one. Like I said, this page is so long and so dense, and there's only like a handful of things I want to get. I didn't do a good enough job, I guess, of bookmarking the places I wanted to go. But one thing I wanted to talk about was this Vulcanalia, all right? And August 23rd of each year. And it's interesting, I never really paid attention, but it's somewhere when I was looking through this stuff, something like 140 days a year were spent partying for during all the festivals and stuff. That's how they treated the citizenry, to epic parties like every third day. It's unbelievable. But they talk about appeasing him because he is the god of violent fire. They have this festival to appease him, and his actual temple is outside of town, so as not to cause any accidental fires in their worship. But during Vulcanalia is when the ritual sacrifices take place, and there's an interesting line here. Right, during the festival, bonfires were created in honor of the god, into which live fish or small animals were thrown as a sacrifice to be consumed in the place of humans. So, to me, that suggests that at one time humans were the ones thrown in the fire to satiate Vulcan. They have a couple of different sun rituals for him. And one of the things I wanted to go into, right, is because this is a fun aside and it's going to tie in later on. I read this and I thought this was curious. It was the Ludi Vulcanaci were held just once on August 23rd, 20 BC, within the temple precinct of Vulcan, and used by Augustus to mark the treaty with Parthia and the return of the legendary standards that had been lost at the Battle of Carrhae, right? And so I was like, this is interesting. So what was Ludi mean? I didn't understand what that was. And they were public games held for the benefit and entertainment of Roman people. They were conjunction with, or sometimes as the major feature of, Roman religious festivals, and were presented as a part of the cult of state, right? Identified emperors and some members of their families within the divinely sanctioned authority of the Roman state. Its framework was based on Roman and Greek presidents, or whatever. It's just interesting that would be part of the cult of state. I like that, back in Roman times, right? Such as they were. The earliest Ludi were horse races, which is interesting because horse racing ties into the carols. They were the first to race horses here in America, and allegedly on their property at Carroll Park, they had a horse track. And it's also, the Preakness is still here, although there's some talk of the Preakness moving, but that's part of the Triple Crown of horse racing, still here in Baltimore City. Animal exhibitions with mock hunts. I even would think the Most Dangerous Game was a part of that, right? Theatrical performances were part of the festivals, these Ludi festivals, and so they only the one time, for whatever reason, for the return of the standards, right? They synced it up with Vulcan, and so I was like, well, what were the standards? I don't know much about the Roman armies and things like this, so I, got to be informed, right? At least a little bit. And so wiki here, they were a prominent symbol used in ancient Rome as the standard of the Roman legion. A legionary known as an aquilifier or eagle bearer carried the standard. The eagle was extremely important to Roman military, beyond merely being a symbol of a legion. A lost standard was considered an extremely grave occurrence. It's just, an eagle on a stick. But to lose one was a grave occurrence, and the Roman military often went to great lengths to both protect a standard and to recover it if lost. For example, see the aftermath of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, where the Romans spent decades attempting to recover the lost standard of 3 legions. Instead of just, build a new one. Yeah, I'm not going to, I can't get those. This is 9 of the Common Era. Okay. Interesting that these standards would be of so much importance. Why does the Cleveland Museum of Art have a Roman standard from 100 to 200 AD? Could it just be their worth in gold that they would spend decades to look for? There must be some sort of other significance to these staffs, which is really what they were, right? Here's another one, a modern reconstruction of an aquila. So this is what they would carry, right? And this is now where the fancy people, when they want to draw their fantasy and create like these staffs were major weapons of electrical capacity or something, this is where you get that idea from. These shapes, definitely lend themselves to that. Look at this thing. And the fact that they would spend decades looking for them. And that they would throw a huge party at the recovery of one. And so So the bundle of, so let's see. So let's do a history of these standards a little bit, right? The most ancient standard employed by the Romans is said to have been a handful of straw mixed to the top of a spear or pole. So you think your handful of straw, now you're talking about your fasces again, The bundle of hay or fern was soon succeeded by the figures of animals, of which Pliny the Elder, he's everywhere when they talk about the spread of this material, right? There were 5. There was the eagle, the wolf, the ox with a man's head, right? The horse and the boar. There's no link for boar. That's interesting. Because I'm sure if I typed in boar, it would bring me to the wild pig. After the devastating Roman defeat at the Battle of Arusio against, okay, I'm not going to read these names. So I guess they lost them all in an embarrassing defeat in 104 BC. They were laid aside and they focused just on the one, right? They said it was made of silver or bronze with outstretched wings, but was probably of a relatively small size, since the standard bearer under Julius Caesar is said in circumstances of danger to have wrenched the eagle from its staff and conceal it in the folds of his. So, it was certainly small enough that in the heat of battle they could take it down off its staff and run and hide with it. Why? Why? You're fighting battle with open armed combat, and under the later emperors, the eagle was carried as if it had been for many centuries with a legion being on that account sometimes called an aquila. Each cohort had its own ensign, the serpent or dragon. Now here we go with the worm knights, right, and the dragons and the Roman stuff, right? It comes in with the Romans, right? The serpent or snake is one of the oldest and most widespread mythological symbols. Of course it is, right? You go back through any sort of conspiracy, at least when it comes to like an alternative, everything points back to the lizard. All of this stuff goes back to serpent and dragon symbology, and you can tie the worm into the dragon, of course. I wanted to see look at this. All right. I didn't read that. The Ark of Constantine. There's the Ark of Constantine. Wow. Okay. Built in AD 315, they want to tell us. Look at the size of that thing. What did they have? What could they have used to build that? See, I'm sorry. I'm just going to read through this. So it says, though dedicated to Constantine, much of the decorated material incorporated the earlier, so they were paying tribute to emperors past with this one, I guess, right? 17th century painting of it. Look at the size of it. And that's just sitting in the middle there. That road. There it is, the north side. This thing is monstrous. And at a time when, if you want to follow the, again, I shouldn't have to spell it out. You want to follow the historical narrative. What could they possibly, what building techniques did they have that they could have built something like this? I wonder, right? Because you want to talk, we're getting near the end of anything really big being built in the mainstream narrative, right? Except for the giant churches, maybe, right? When the fall of Rome was the last of the big, right? The quote-unquote fall of Rome was the last of the big buildings, I think, right? Except for the major churches that were going to come in like 1000 AD. So interesting that my arch here in Baltimore is just paying tribute to arches past that use arches as ways to tell stories. False. Represents the first one represents Trajan giving a king to the Parthians. To show the number of standards and everything on it, I guess. I wanted to get to the one. Maybe it was. I don't know. It's just so interesting. I'm sorry, guys. I could just go on forever with that stuff, and I encourage you guys to look through it. But there was a really cool dragon standard with a tail, and they say that there may have been whistles in it. And so when the horse riders were carrying the standards, they would make a real eerie whistling sound, meant to spook opponents, right? I'm not done with the mythology here. So there are other connections with his mythology as well, and they were that he was like one of the things that matches up with my seal here. In one of his origins, let's see if I can find it, because I can't remember the if it was Hera or what's the god. Maybe it was Juno, or there's different. In some stories, he's the father of Juno, and others he's like the husband of, and it's kind of crazy. But in one origin story, he's born, and the mother goddess rejects him and throws him out of Mount Olympus, just chucks him out, right? And he lands in the ocean, and he gets adopted under the sea, but he's badly injured his leg. And so I think it's interesting in this seal, his leg is so out of joint. Further reinforcing the idea that that's Vulcan. Why won't I? See how jacked his leg is. And he gets the last laugh. He makes a chair as a gift, right? Because his adopted mother, goes to Mount Olympus or wherever, and is wearing one of Vulcan's pearl necklaces that he made for, and whoever whether it was Juno or whoever, covets the necklace. And so when she finds out that it's the son that she threw away, she gets angry and demands that Vulcan be imprisoned. But he wins her over with a gift of a fabulous chair. And the minute she sits in it, it's a trap, and she gets trapped in the chair. And so Jupiter has to make a deal with him that he can marry Venus. And he is released. That's a fun story. God, I can bring it. It's definitely Vulcan, and there are definitely so many ways that Vulcan ties in with the histories going back into the Worm Knights, and the way it's going to come out of the Roman era into, it's going to explode about the 800s or so, in the history of at least the story that the way the Mud City wants to take it from me. God, there's so much more I wanted to do with him too, I feel like, but you get the idea. Super important. And so what is his connection with the printing press? And so in Baltimore, there's a very famous paper, the Baltimore Sun. I'm sure there are fans of The Wire out there, and The Wire, used the Sun, and the creator of The Wire, David Simon, worked for the Sun and featured the Sun in Homicide, his show Homicide, and others, I'm sure as well. Right? So I'm going to read this article from the Baltimore Sun. And so it's all right, here we go. So September 12th, 2012. Interesting. So the Baltimore Sun, whose pages have chronicled Maryland life and its institution for generations, whose reporters covered every government and conflict and glory of the city since long before the Civil War, celebrated its 175th anniversary in 2012. Ever since Volume 1, Number 1 rolled off 30-year-old Aruna Shepherdson Abel's press on Wednesday, May 17, 1837, the newspaper has never been without its sun vignette or nameplate bearing the words "Light for All." Let's just look at this paragraph real quick. And the founder's name, I don't know what Aruna means, but Shepherdson, son of the shepherd, right? And Abel, Cain and Abel. All right, press on Wednesday, May 17th, 1837. The newspaper had never been without sun vignette. And I didn't bring up the vignette. And the Light for All, who's the bringer of light. Yeah. The concept of Light for All embodied Abel's philosophy that his newspaper would cover the news for all, not just for Baltimore's moneyed, banking, legal, or merchant classes, but the common masses. And this is interesting, all right? Because well, at least to me, I'll show you why. All right, a little later in this article. So Abel, who had been born and raised in East Providence, Rhode Island, worked as a shipping clerk before becoming an apprentice printer at the Providence Patriot in 1822. Now that's an interesting date because on another one of my medallions, the seals, 1822 is carved in. And that could fit in with the city plan of Baltimore. The steam engine, the first steam engine might have come out of Baltimore, or at least for the railroad. I have to look into that. Maybe the patent for 1822. I don't know. So he moves. He moves to New York, and he becomes acquainted with these guys, who I did not look into. There'll be another time, right? Azariah Simmons and William Swain, with whom he formed a business partnership to publish a penny paper. So they founded the Public Ledger in 1836 in Philadelphia, and a year later, Abel's partners agreed to back him when he proposed starting a penny paper in Baltimore, whose population at the time was 90,000. So they had 90,000 people in Baltimore in 1836, or 1837 rather. So I just, on a side note, the Ledger lasts in Philadelphia until, I believe it was the 1940s or 1950s. It had a nice long life in Philadelphia. So we have resolved upon the experiment of publishing a penny paper entitled The Sun. We shall strive to render it a channel of useful information to every citizen in every department of society, whether literary, professional, mercantile, manufacturing, or miscellaneous, wrote Abel and his two partners. The birth of the Sun couldn't have come at a more inauspicious moment, as the nation was reeling from the effects of the panic of 1837, which had resulted in failed banks, inflation, shuttered factories, and high unemployment. I'm going to come back to that paragraph. At the time, Abel also faced formidable competition, as there were already 6 papers in the city: the American, the Chronicle, the Gazette, Patriot, Republican, and Transcript, that sold for 6 cents a copy. Now think about that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 papers, 6 cents a copy. If you bought all 6 papers, that's 36 cents a day, which at the time is a lot of money. In 1836, I mean, even a penny was a lot of money in 1836. I don't know if it was like quite a buck, but I would imagine that, that's the way I'm imagining it anyway. And I'm hard pressed to spend a buck on a newspaper today, let me tell you. So imagine $6 a copy, That's crazy, So it's unlike the stuffy and pompous newspapers being published. So the newspapers, he's saying, were essentially geared toward the upper class anyway. So I wonder what their their print runs were. That might be an interesting side story someday. All right. So being published in the City Times, which were more reflective of opinion rather than hard news. And so Abel went in a different direction. And he assembled a team of reporters who were responsible for covering the courts and City Hall, meetings, police districts, and anything else. So he shows up in Baltimore. He's looking at a population of 90,000. You know, I didn't think about this. I mean, how many people could he have possibly been looking to sell paper to? Because how many were even literate? You know, you have to consider that in there. You know, how many people were literate in? Where the heck is theirs? So we got 90,000. Say you even at best are hoping to reach 30,000. All right, people. That's like $300. That's your gross income at a penny a paper. $300. You know, and again, finding out what $300 was worth, or $100, or $1 rather, was worth in 1837. Like I said, I think I want to say, you know, $1. It was 11.11 when I checked this, by the way, just now. It's probably even on my, no, it was 11.12 on my computer there. So just say, it was $40. $1 equals $40, which I think is high, but at one time I think I checked, and I believe that's what it came out to. So just for you know, S and giggles, that would be $12,000 gross profit on a run of newspaper a day if he sold it to a third of the population, 30,000 people. You know, which I think he would be lucky to do in that age. But you know, again, that's just my gut instinct. I don't have any hard facts or, you know, anything to back that up. So you have to think about it. $300 a day. How much was he paying his team of reporters at that time? You know, is he giving each one $1? You know, so maybe he has 10 or, you know, at best 20 guys. You know. So he's already cut into, you know, his gross by 1/15, and then you got to get your paper and everything like that. So how much money is there really in that at that time, at a penny a paper, you know? So so that's just an interesting aside there. Right? So their efforts were very apparent when the first issue of The Sun, whose type most likely had been hand set by Abel himself. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever seen, you know, these old typesets. They have the Baltimore Museum of Industry has one, and it's a massive machine. And to hand set anything with the what they had then was a job. And so the first edition was 4 tabloid sized pages, and that's a lot of typesetting to do, you know, especially if he was going to do this daily, you know. So the first edition of The Sun, I just read that, on page 2, in a note to readers, Abel laid out what has remained the newspaper's enduring guiding philosophy and course for the past 175 years. We shall give no place to religious controversy, nor to political discussions of merely partisan character. On political principles and questions involving the interest of honor of the whole country, it will be free, firm, and temperate. Our object will be the common good, without regard to that of sex, faction, or parties, and for this object we shall labor without fear of partiality. The publication of this paper will be continued for 1 year at least, and the publishers hope to receive, as they will try to deserve, a liberal support. So here we go. They give us a number, 15,000 copies. So, you know, $150 profit if he sold them all at a penny a piece. Pardon me. So the Sun made history 4 months after its founding when it printed in its entirety President Martin Van Buren's 12,000-word address to Congress. The text had been rushed to Baltimore by a courier aboard a fast-moving Baltimore and Ohio Railroad passenger train. I think about that. Abel was able to have the text set in type in time for the morning paper and was successful in beating the competition, which did not get the story until the next day. So, I mean, this is an incredible story because, I mean, like I said, setting 12,000-word address in the overnight in time for the morning paper. It was like, when did Martin Van Buren deliver this address, right? And a fast-moving Baltimore train in, what did they say? Did it give the year? Martin Van Buren, when was he president? It must have been the 30s or 1840s, maybe. It was still taking the better part of a day to get from D.C. to Baltimore, a few hours minimum. All right, so to set it and have it out on the streets a full day before your closest competitor is an amazing story, right? And like I said, when you're making, although, like I said, it was 150 print run, right? Yeah, you're making it's like a grand a week, so, $300,000 a year, that's major money, in that age, but, so that's just interesting, that snowball effect for what a penny can get you, right? It can get you to $300,000 a year in the 1830s. All right. So here we go. I had a circulation of 12,000. So just a little bit under my estimations there, right? So he moved, and I'm going to talk about this building because this is where Vulcan's going to come back and connect with the sun, right? To move into a large building at Gay and Baltimore Streets, right? But he also quickly embraced new technology that he envisioned would aid his news gathering efforts and lead to a better paper. Right? Abel became a backer and supporter of the Magnetic Telegraph Company. Interesting to see where that would take us, I bet, if I were to follow through on it. During the Mexican War, Abel set up a combination of telegraph, railroad, steamboat, stagecoaches, and a Pony Express line to speed war news from New Orleans. Right? And history was made again when the Sun ordered that President James K. Polk's Mexican War message to Congress be telegraphed to Baltimore in its entirety so it could be published. The Sun ordered the office of the president to telegraph his address to Congress. Can you think about that statement? How much power the Baltimore Sun had in the 1840s and 50s? All right. From its beginning, the Sun had a Washington correspondent, a postal clerk, moving into the Gothic Victorian building in 1872, which I'll show a picture of in a little bit. The high-speed rotary press was invented in 1846, which allowed the Sun to print 20,000 copies an hour. And, think about that, how many copies a day do you need, and how far are you shipping out your paper, across the region? It's certainly getting to D.C. and points in Virginia, and it's going up north to Philadelphia, I'm sure, and to even New York and perhaps Boston by a couple of days behind schedule. And that's another thing about that era. There I go again with the error. About that era and the and communication and how fast news traveled, and how quickly they could plan things. They would have to plan things well in advance and make sure that things went out the way they needed them to go. This is interesting here. A flight of 500 carrier pigeons were also used for news gathering, right? And you may think that's funny, but I've been, like I said, I've been doing research on the history of the Virginia colony and the Maryland colony, the proprietorship. And believe it or not, the early settlers claim that there were millions and millions and millions of carrier pigeons that were native to the Virginia territory. They say they would black the skies out for days, is what's claimed in some, and I can't wait to get to that. So here they can move into, and this is where it ties in, right? Abel moves his paper in 1851 to the architecturally important building at Baltimore and South Streets, which became known as the Sun Iron Building. The cast iron building had been designed by Bogartis. He bogarted all right. It was the newspaper's home until the Baltimore fire of 1904, which destroyed the buildings. No employees were killed, which is amazing to think about it, because you know that if a paper was humming along at the rate they say it was, there was 24-hour employees at the Baltimore Sun in 1904. No doubt about it. Man in the telegraphs from messages coming in all over the world, apparently, allegedly, right? The Civil War enacted a great strain on Abel and the Sun, because he was, though Northerner, he was sympathetic to the Southern cause. And when the city was occupied, he was warned that any pro-Confederate articles could lead to his arrest and charges of sedition. I wonder how many he printed, going back on his statement that the Sun would always be free. With the end of the Civil War, Abel editorially supported the reenfranchisement of the voters, the acceptance of African Americans as freemen, and President Andrew Johnson's plans for the reconstruction of the South. Okay, I like this statement here, the acceptance of African Americans as freemen, because as I've shown a little bit already, and there's more to the story, African Americans were freely accepted in Baltimore City and in Washington, D.C. as freemen post-Civil War era. And it wasn't until much later when legislation was actually passed, and probably unlooked for legislation, I would add, that segregation was put in place in some cities. Now, further south, I don't know about, but certainly in Baltimore and D.C., the story was a lot different. In the 1880s, he put telephones. I mean, he was first for every major development in the spreading of information. Shepherdson Abel, because Abel was a shepherd's son, right? And I'm very curious about what his first name may mean. So I'm going to close it out here, because I don't, that's about the end of the story. I just want to carry it with him, and now it's the building of the Iron Building. Let's go back a little bit more to the article, right? Because it says the newspaper was fortuitous or inauspicious. Was that the word they used? It was an inauspicious moment as the nation. What was the date of it now? It was March something 37, right? Where did that date go? Sorry, guys. See, this is the curse of not being able to see so well. It was out there somewhere. Anyway, so it was around this time, right? So the Panic of 1837. So I wanted to look at what the heck was the Panic of 1837, right? And so it was a financial crisis in the United States that touched off a major recession that lasted until the mid-1840s. So now think about that. Now we have a recession that starts in 1837 that lasts into the 1840s. But this guy strolls into Baltimore, sets up a penny paper, which again, now you got to remember, pennies were significant. You could buy real things with a penny. You could buy food and clothing and things like that. Every penny mattered because they were an actual usable currency. And so it's interesting that he would find the success that he had, being able to. in the first year of his company, the first year of the Baltimore Sun, take in somewhere, it was 12,000, 1,200, $120 an issue a day, right? So, if you put that out, it's going to be almost $300,000 a year, right? Which is amazing for a recession in the mid-1840s. Profits, prices, and wages went down while unemployment went up. So who was working? Who would buy these newspapers? And you know that most of the unemployed were more than likely illiterate, for the most part, right? Speculative lending practices in western states, a sharp decline in cotton prices, a collapsing land bubble, international specie flows, and restrictive lending policies in Great Britain were all to blame. On May 10, 1837, banks in New York City suspended specie payments, meaning that they would no longer redeem commercial paper in specie at full face value. So what the heck is a specie, And it's a bullion coin struck from precious metal and kept as a store of value or an investment rather than used in day-to-day commerce. So that's like the token for the Johns Hopkins orphanage, right? Or what like a Bitcoin would be today, right? It's an investment thing, right? And so they're saying that investment in hard currency was failing. If it was backed by precious metal anyway, right? And that Great Britain was probably still a little pissed about what happened in the 1814, right? So banks collapsed, businesses failed, prices declined, thousands of workers lost their jobs, and in a city like Baltimore, where they say the population was 90,000, 25% of that, you're talking 22,000 people without a job. And it was deflation, right? So did you see that? 1837 to 1844. So there was a brief period of economic expansion. Oops, it says from 18. I like how the expansion parts are always brief. They're just a couple of years, right? And then the recessions last like a decade, 6-7 years minimum, right? Because of the specie curricular of international trade, abundant amounts of silver were coming into the United States from Mexico and China. Land sales and tariffs, and this is an interesting statement too. Because I'm going to touch on the importance of silver in Baltimore because I learned something over this last weekend that's not relevant to this today, but it's making further connection for me. Land sales and tariffs on imports were also generating substantial federal revenues. The lucrative cotton exports and marketing of the state-backed bonds in British money markets, the United States acquired significant capital investment from Great Britain. Right, so again, what was the point of the war again? I mean, how much independence could they have if they're just, dealing with themselves again and this banking regard? It's fishy. No doubt about it. So I'm not going to get all into the history. So interesting that the paper should survive and thrive in this era of panic and finding 25% of the population in a city like Baltimore, which allegedly was a heavy manufacturing town. So again, more empty warehouses, just as today, right? And so I wanted to look at the history of recessions a little bit, all right? I think and it shows. Right here it says the recessions in the United States shows that they are a natural, though painful, part of the business cycle. Everything is cyclical, just like my arch, right? And the stories that they tell of their, destruction and rebuilding. The National Bureau of Economic Research determines when a recession starts and ends. Of course they do. I wonder who's in charge of the National Bureau of Economic Research. All right. So they just go here. They show what they saw the. This gets interesting quick, right? So they list the first one as 1797, right? resulted from land speculation in the newly formed United States. The bubble burst just as the deflation in Europe impacted the rest of the world. Robert Morris, who helped finance the Revolutionary War, ended up in prison for his debts. He was in debt despite owning more land at that time than anyone else in the United States. That's crazy interesting, right? And Robert Morris, I think, was he tobacco as well? Interesting that he would... I wonder what his prison was like. I wonder if it was just a giant country club, on some enormous plantation somewhere, because prisons in the early colonists, especially going back to the first, the St. Mary's here in Maryland, the prisons, it's very, very interesting relationship, prisons and these. Wait, did you see that? It went from 1797, right, to 1857. Where's the Great Panic of 1837? I think the National Bureau of Economic Research fell asleep on the job there a little bit. Right? It says the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company failed. In addition, approximately 5,000 businesses went under, 1857, right? So it lasted almost 2 years, right? So you're coming into the 1860s, and then 13 years later, we have the recession of 1837. Or 1873, rather. I'm sorry, a little dyslexia there. And then we have 20 years later, so a little bit of time between that one, right? Oh, that one lasted more than 5 years. So now we're going to 78. So it's like 15 years later, we have the recession of 1893. All right, and then it lasted 4 years. So, 97 to 07, and then 10 years, 1907. Then we have the Great Depression. Right, how long did this one? This one lasted about a year, it says. So 1908 to so here we have 21 years of, we have the war, and so there's, when the war machine is rolling, the economy is booming, right? So we're not worried about recession then. All right, and then you get the Great Depression, which we needed, of course, to get the New Deal going, and because this is, like I said, it's in this era when I believe the switch was truly flicked on us, right? And then we have the recession of 1945, right at the tail end of the war. All right, then we get another one just a few years after that, 49. Right, and then we get one in 53, and 5 years, and then 4 years, 3 years, recession, here's one in 10 years, and then in 2 years they call it another recession. Where do even like the 2 year gaps in economic growth disappear? Where do they go from 1960 or from 1970 on? For my entire life has been recession. That's what that says to me, right? So I think that's interesting. And I wanted to look at some of the buildings that the Baltimore Sun inhabited. This is the one that gets built after the fire, which I have some information on, I think, somewhere. Maybe not. I did bring up a little bit of information about, when it was built and destroyed. It was built in 1906. I think I have another picture of it somewhere. Yeah, I do. Or not. See, I'm going to be looking into all that. Here it is. Here's that same building from a different angle. So it was built in 1906 and razed in 1964, right? The most imposing facade built downtown immediately after the Great Fire. Right, its style was passionately sought after by proprietors around the city, right? And it was vacated in 1950, and then it succumbed to the Charles Center clearance. All right, and that's interesting. A lot of big buildings like this got destroyed in this Charles Center clearance. I don't know when this picture was from, but here it is in 1930. There was a fire here or something. Clearly, that happened, and they took this picture for that. But I'm a little sad that my... Oh, and I also just wanted to show that I got that from this book. I picked up recently Lost Baltimore Landmarks, which is playing a huge factor in the stuff that I've been looking into. Like I said, I haven't been spending my... I've been spending my downtime with a little leisure, no doubt about it, but I've been hitting the books pretty hard as well, and there's lots of interesting stuff coming. So this is the building that it had in downtown. It still has, right? And it has, lions on it, and for faces, and I'm sure there's others if I were to go and look. And but I'm going to get into the importance of the lion very, very soon. And so when I talk about the cast iron buildings, and that the Baltimore Sun, the first one, let's see. Yeah. Although the number left standing in Baltimore is dwindling, a century ago there were more than 100 of them. But by 1962, the city was down to 36, and today there are only 9 left, with 13 that just have the fronts. And so many of them were destroyed in the 1904 fire. Most of the ones that remain are protected. So here we go, right? Cast iron, unlike wrought iron, is formed by pouring hot iron into a mold. And this is where, now, this is the forging aspect of iron, and tying the sun in with Vulcan comes in there. And again, I feel like even though I probably spent 20 minutes on them, I know I dropped the ball. There's so much that was in there. All right, this building received international acclaim, but it perished in the fire. But yeah, I wanted to talk about cast iron a little bit, and it dates back to, and I look at these melting points and I go, geez, what was the fuel in the fires of the Baltimore fire? Because they call this a low melting point. I'm sure that's true, but that's still really high. What burns at that temperature? To smelt cast iron, right? 5th century BC, the earliest artifacts, in what is now China, right? But but by the 1770s, cast iron was being in the construction of buildings. So they want to tell us. And now that's the 1770s is an interesting time, because that's the end of that Victorian era. I guess that's my thing now. When construction of bigger buildings would really start, and they're using these cast iron molds and stuff, and that fits right in with Vulcan. And all right, so to close out, I wanted to look at Aruna Shepherdson Abel, right? Born in Providence, and you can hear. Can you guys hear that alarm going on outside? So they list his father here, but I guess I'm gonna have to search him. I looked ahead. Let's look up Cable, right? I had to go looking for him. His father, rather, Aruna Shepherdson's father, is not in this index here. But I was able to find stuff on his grandfather. Right, and trace him back further. right? So his grandfather was born in Norwich, New London, right? He was the son of this Caleb. See, now that that's in my head, it's stuck, right? Sergeant Caleb Abel, right? Who comes? He was actually born in the Plymouth colony, so that puts Shepherdson's great grandfather as first generation American, right? Which I think is interesting, and so let's bring it back to England with Robert Abel. And Robert Abel was born in Leicestershire. I would say that. With black and white, which is not a color code that I see very much of. But interesting that Rehoboth is a area not far in Delaware along the Maryland-Delaware border, right? And like they can trace him back to George A. Abel. You know, is he a worm knight? Oh, he's a worm knight. George A. Abel. Can't see. So he's a black and white one, I guess. So his family goes back with these English ties, you know. So, you know, he was connected. He didn't just happen to stumble along and start the Baltimore Sun and become this massive publisher. And, and it's one thing I forgot to mention too in that article, the history of the Sun. Where did that one go? In a minute. See, I'm not so good at this stuff. I lost it. They talk about, he actually says it in that mission statement in veiled language that he can manipulate the public perception of current events on a working class scale, and that was his goal, and that's what, so that's the story really of this seal. It's a tribute to the Baltimore Sun, its influence and power, and they use Vulcan as a tribute through the cast iron building of the Baltimore Sun buildings, and then the power of the printing press. The one thing, there's this behind him here, these arches, which is interesting that I was able to tie it back to that Arch of Constantine, and and the arch also could represent the firmament. It could represent a million things, very, very interesting, and like I said, with the part about his leg and everything, if there are people out there who are really up on their mythology, they'll appreciate that. And like I said, I regret that I didn't do as good a job as I should, and I'm sure this episode is over an hour long already, so I'm going to close it up. But I had a lot of fun with this one. There's so many great connections with the Baltimore Sun, and there's going to be more with them. Their influence cannot be understated. Like I said, at one point, it says they ordered the office of the president to send them a speech. And, that to me is a crazy, 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 crazy concept when you talk about the power of the media, and, how many papers he could have been selling, and the power of what a penny can get you if you add them up. I had another picture. Did I get to talk about that other picture? Oh, right. See, and another connection with Vulcan is that he is possibly the father of Hermes. And here's Hermes on the side of the B&O building. All right. And one of the things I don't think I stressed when I did my walking delusion. What it's going to come is, look at this sun plate. Maybe I did stress it that day. That sun plate back there. I'm really mesmerized by that. Yeah. So, anyway, okay. I've gone on long enough with this one. These arches, it's unbelievable the story they're telling, you know, and the connections that can be. Oh my God! And I didn't even. Yeah, it's gonna be longer, guys. I gotta go. I gotta do this. I didn't touch on any of this. Did I? Look what else comes up when you click on Vulcan. And I did. I think I said it, but then I didn't go look at the company. Look at this thing. Here's the news page for this Vulcan Enterprises, right? The Strato launch, right? And so what this is they want to use this. They want to put this up in the sky and then use this as an intermediary launching point out, allegedly, into outer space. That's what this does, right? Right? And so Vulcan is a company, a trust that was set up after Paul Allen's death. And Paul Allen is, I don't know if you know, I can't assume everybody knows, but he was a co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates, right? And so it flew for 2.5 hours over the Mojave Desert, achieving a maximum speed of 189 miles an hour at an altitude of 17,000 feet. And so they want to use this as an intermediary launching post for the next stage, you know, to go into orbit, I guess, right? You know, but this organization, they're hunting for the USS Hornet, right? The Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence launches, you know, so again, you know, to tie it all back, media turns into, you know, when you want to manipulate what the public can see and know, and you can use these animations and computer programming and all this other stuff. I mean, they all tie hand in hand, you know. He has humanitarian things. Earth Rangers, you know, what was the Earth Ranger? They talk about this hunting here as like until launched a massive $7 million project to count Africa's savanna elephant population. Let's say it was maybe this. Yeah, maybe this isn't what I wanted to see. Tech for good. That's what Vulcan Incorporated does. Inc. does. Tech for good, right? Executing big ideas. Look, the Vulcan symbol is a chevron. You know. Oh, and not to mention, Vulcan is also a god of fertility. Can't talk about that. He impregnates a bunch of people. And when I did the one other thing with the Vulcan search, right, which I had to search deeper for. Vulcan motorcycles. Oh, the Vulcan Iron Man, which is an iron statue, cast iron statue of the Roman god in Birmingham, Alabama, which is interesting. Vulcan Centaur, which is I didn't look at this. What is that? Adaptability, capability, partnership and value. Vulcan space launch, right? Yeah, it's a multimedia gallery. Vulcan wire. Vulcan Brill. What? The technological determinism in military history. Vulcan is the journal of the history of military technology. It solicits papers for a theme issue on... Wow. I'm gonna have to look for one of these. I wonder if... See, I'm thinking out loud there, guys. Sorry. Interesting, more ties to Vulcan and publishing, right? And that it's military, the history of military technology, is amazing. And I thought this is the one I was looking for. I kind of missed that one. Vulcan Productions, which is a subset of Paul Allen's, right? It's like Earth Under Siege, Spreading Survival, Pushing the Limits, Truth Seekers, Vulcan Productions, Educating and Inspiring. That's all part of Paul Allen's, but it's interesting they would put like Truth Seekers in there. So anyway, okay, yeah, that's as far as I'm going to go with this one. Thanks for sticking around for this one, guys. I really enjoyed it. I love this aspect. I love what's happening with the story on the arches. And going forward, it just gets even bigger, tying into the bigger story of the possible hidden Roman and Greek god worship in Baltimore, and perhaps not so hidden after all. So, all right, everybody, please, take care of yourselves and each other. Everybody love everybody. And until the next one, cheers, guys.